The lawyers do go the extra mile.
Yes, and the way they select their internships or their mentorship programs, or how some of them break from school and go do something and then come back, will just tell you this is a top-notch journalist. So it's not about the skills, the training. Everybody gets that. That's the bare minimum. But this kind of journalists always go out to do something extra. I think Hussein can attest to that. Yeah. They always go out to do something extra. And the other thing about them, they are very interested in broad aspects of journalism. You find them in DevCom classes or development journalism class. You find them in specialized writing. So they try to pick out where their niche is.
Different elements.
So I think what happens is, just like in any given situation, a good journalist will emerge right from day one. You can be able to tell, or a cluster of them. And if you're keen in teaching, you'll find that the good journalists will always gather around each other. So even if you group them, they'll be working in a clique, and they'll be visiting you in terms of mentorship to see what they can do.
Get more.
Yes, yeah. So
all right.
I think that's the issue.
Okay, Anthony, you're a communications consultant, and what are some of the elements that you feel? Because really, for any journalist, not just investigative, it's really about how you tell the story. It is a storytelling profession. What are some of the qualities that you'd want to see possibly more in the newsroom in terms of getting that story out there? Not just sensationalizing it, but getting facts, figures, and everything in place so that the story is complete.
I think if you want to be, excuse me, if you want to be an investigative journalist, and a good one at that, first you have to be a good regular journalist. By good, I mean you have to get your facts right. You have to be up to date with what's happening. You have to be good at your research and finding your sources and news. And you have to be good at analysis, where analysis means, if I did this story, what's the impact? Not just on the public, but even the people that I'm investigating. You have to be aware that it might tarnish their name, and how are you going to come out of it if it was a reputational thing. So you have to have all those skills. But you also must have a passion for the trade, must have a passion for the topic that you're investigating. And you'll find out that most times those who do the investigative journalists have either had a friend or a close person who's been impacted by the kind of things that are committed undercover, and which a lot of people in institutions or corporates want to hide from you. Or they may have been a victim. So they go the extra mile, and you realize this is not their regular assignment. This is something they sometimes even they take initiative and say, I think this is a good story, and they go to the editor and say, I want to follow up in this story. On the flip side of things, when you're talking about resource allocation for investigative journalism and also in relation to what's a good journalist, I think at the training and academia level, that would be the best place for anyone who's interested in putting resources into investigative journalism to put it in that. Because then it allows the institution to pick some of the most, as Malumi here is identifying, that you can tell some of the most passionate students and who can go into investigative journalism can actually take it up, but the resources supporting them and funding them should come in at that point. Then you will be improving on the capacity of journalists to do investigative journalism. And they're also, at education level, they're also far removed from the biases that would normally traditionally happen. But you still have to guard yourself. I mean, if I am sponsoring an investigative journalism program at USIU, I do not expect any of the students to come and investigate me. Or even, but an investigative journalist is the kind of person who would want to investigate my source of income, even though I am providing resources for them to study on how to be a
so
good.
the passion needs to go that far. And maybe
maybe just to add something, I'm actually teaching media ethics this semester, and the first class I normally take them through some reading about moral courage, and the 3 elements of moral courage is danger, perseverance, and more or less endurance. So, I really want to bring that sense that, all these little things you've been doing are good. It's all good. You even know media law. That's all good. But the bottom line is the decision you make at that point of telling the story is what really counts. And are you willing to put your life in danger Or are you willing to follow through the 2 months, sitting hungry and, follow it through the story, waiting for the results? Yes. Are you willing to push yourself to that level and look at impact? So that now you find that even if you talk to investigative journalists like Alan, they'll tell you more, it's not really about telling stories, it's more about, at the end of the day, what change will come to the society. So there's a higher calling, to just tell stories and be able to churn out. And when you talk about that idea of, starting it right at college, I hope to go to South Africa in October to Witwatersrand, because that university has a unit that is not teaching, that is dedicated to investigative journalism. And they literally have stories that they churn out right from there, not to tell them per se, but to use that then to inform their learning. So I think those are the things that come out critical, because where to capture the journalist is at the
right
training.
At the basics,
yes.
the training part. And maybe, Hussein, now that you're here, how did you end up on the investigative desk? And I'm sure you may not have started there, but what led you there?
First, I'll say that, as Koki puts it right, mentorship is key. Mentorship is key. I mean, before I was just I was a Swahili reporter. I'm still a Swahili reporter, but I was under the wings of the likes of Kasim Mohammed, who was the producer for Jicho Pevu. Mohammed Ali was there, John Alan Namu. We sat in the desk. I used to try and do the stories. I remember my first story I did around 2013, 2012. There's a lady who was beaten up at Shelter Afrique. I tried to investigate the story slowly. I was still a trainee reporter, but I had the zeal and the drive to tell the story. But I told the story, but it didn't come out well. I remember my predecessors telling me, you're starting. Then one day we did a story in Garissa University, the expose, where we said that the government knew about these attacks, and later the minister fired everyone, and then our car was trailed. We had so many challenges back then, and then I came back to the office and I was telling Muhammad Ali and Jolan Nam, my car was trailed. The guys are following us, and they're all laughing. Now you're welcome to the
You
club
made
now.
the cut.
Now you've done the right thing.
Yeah. There's somewhere you've hit, and honestly, it's all about mentorship, and it's all about, as she says, that the investigative eye. If you see someone with the investigative eye who really, or he or she wants to come out and tell these kind of stories, it's for us to mentor. So with time I came up, and then they all left. And I was left with the hurdle of trying to tell this kind of stories. Yes. And right now, as you put in investigative journalism in Kenya, you can count how many people are investigative journalists. It's because of one, as he puts it, we need to start down there. To try and mold people. And people think, for a very long time, people thought that investigative stories must have drama, must have the action. Red Meat didn't have drama. Yes, mine had drama. Homegrown, I didn't have so much drama. It's all about, you can tell the story of the Mamboga. You can tell the story of in Meru, the coffee, a young woman planting coffee there. It's all about different stories, but it's for us to try and put resources to it. There are no resources. We need to be frank. The most inhibitor is resources and money. Who is going to fund an investigative story? We have very few companies, HIVOS, KMP, who try to fund investigative stories. Why? It's because this is the future of journalism, but no one wants to fund them, because these are the people who, as it says, you need to go and see the sources.
Investigate. So of course they don't want that to grow. But Anthony, also there's a question of safety, because that's one element we cannot forget. He's just mentioned that now he was told, now you have qualified, and this is because he was being trailed. So of course you're doing investigative pieces which may affect people's lives permanently, and some of them negatively. Not because you want to, but because if they're doing wrong, really, there are some people, like you mentioned, there are some people who lose their jobs, there are others who may go to prison, so the effects and the impact may be felt later. How do we ensure that our journalists are safe?
I think in ensuring the journalists are safe, we have to, first of all, try and look for legislative mechanisms that are available to the protection. One, of freedom of expression, and then protection of there was actually, unfortunately, like the late Ken called the passed an anti-torture law, which sometimes is what is used to threaten journalists, and that fear is what makes people not want to do stories. Then we also have to look at the institutions that are responsible, right from training, membership organizations, journalists are members of the Editors Guild, but they need to look for legislative avenues through which this protection can be guaranteed. Out of 10 investigative journalists who are working here, there's potential for having about 30 more who could have been doing this. And think about it this way. I think some of the investigative journalists alive in this country today or anywhere in the world are alive because they are in the media. But there are many people, or even their sources, who have lost their lives. Or many other people who had a hunch over stories that they think are really good and they're following it up. But because they don't work for a media, they've lost their lives, they've lost their property, they've been harassed, they've had to leave and go and live in exile. And I think we also know that internationally there are a lot of journalists who have not just lost their lives, but have had to seek asylum because there isn't enough guarantee and protection inside the country to protect them. So I know there are opportunities for lawyers to support journalists and what, but unless most of this is anchored in law, so that I do not have to feel safe as an investigative journalist because I work for a certain media house, but I feel safe because as a human being, I have the right to access information, I have freedom of expression, and that what I am doing is good for the public.
Absolutely.
Just to add on it, the issue of risk assessment and risk management is the whole issue here. The reason why most guys are scared to join the investigative journalism is because of they think that it's risky. Yeah, it's risky, but what is the assessment, as he puts it? What is the management of the company, or even self-management as a journalist? What are you doing to try and curb these things? We have had issues, as you said, as he puts it. I mean, fixers who have lost their lives, I mean, trying to gather stories, and they haven't reached, I mean, the media personality or the media houses, but they are doing themselves down the ground. There are people who have that urge, and they have lost their life. We have journalists, Ahmed Hussein, you remember what happened, Anas, Arimayo Anas, I mean, he lost his life, he was killed by a politician. These are the issues. In Kenya, we have a bit of a safe space compared to Tanzania and Uganda. Serwanja and Kasim Mohammed were arrested for the BBC story in Uganda. We have a safe space, but what are some of the risk management that we are doing as a country, as a media house, and as a person, as a journalist?
Right. Yeah, and of course on Thursday and Friday we'll be with Media Council at the Ajea Awards, and those are the issues we should be interrogating. I hope the panels will interrogate that, because the stronger the profession, if we keenly, critically look at our profession and put in what is required to keep us safe, or, you know, strengthen legal aspects, strengthen expectations of the media, strengthen protection for our journalists on the ground, either legally or in terms of what is the gear they need to wear, then people will begin to take the whole profession seriously and begin to see that we are keen that this is a dangerous kind of risky kind of endeavor, and it is our onus to interrogate what will make us safer. And what I like about Kenya, why we have this space, even if, you know, governments change, why we have this space is that we didn't have it for so long. And now that it is here, it is our onus to make sure, in terms of self-regulation, we're able to make sure that people respect the profession for what it is. And one of the things that will help the public respect what we do is more or less what we are saying. Let's invest in these stories that help correct society. Let's invest in stories that will have impact beyond the border. I always think about the house bubble in the US. And after some time, we were doing a class, and I told them, okay, read about the Basel, I think, conventions and meetings that tightened how money is moved, you know, globally. And today you can see the impact even in your country today. You know, for me to transfer $1 million bob, I have to explain, you know, where I've got it and all that. So it started as a story in the US, but it has impact. Look at the Panama Papers. We begin to say, oh, oh, they are safe havens. We didn't know. And now we begin to interrogate how many people, we begin to see people on lists who are saving there. And then we begin to question how did they get that money and all that.
All right, well, we'll have to wind up now because of time. I'll start with your closing comments, and maybe I'll start with you, Anthony, on the future of investigative journalism and maybe some of the structures that we need to have in place to ensure that it grows, because it has a risk of diminishing given the risk factors, given the resources that it requires, given the time that an investigative piece may take. Some may even take years.
I think the future is bright. I mean, every time that I look at what kind of information passes through our social media as Kenya, social media, I see a lot of not just potential but also opportunity for looking out for different stories, because the advantage they have with social media is it's so diverse. And the people are located everywhere in this country, and sometimes it's areas where the media per se would not be able to reach, at least not in time. So we need to start looking at individual journalism, and I call it journalism in court. Individuals who seem to be getting the stories, individuals who have connections and fixers, who will be able to get your story from different locations, and then look at how we can incorporate them in the value chain that is journalism and is media right now. I think we're looking at a very conglomerated media, and we're looking at a media that is able to get a story in Lodwar now by just calling one contact, or looking at the social media or even WhatsApp groups. I was at a meeting yesterday. I was very surprised that a lot of people knew about the meeting through a WhatsApp group. Even though it was in the papers, it was on radio, it was on television.
But WhatsApp was their
first point of contact where they got that information. So it's a look at how can we incorporate this as sources of media, and how can we strengthen them so that they are more credible in the kind of information that they provide to major media houses.
All right. Hussein, your view on the future of investigative journalism and the structures that we need in place.
I think for me, in journalism, the future of journalism is investigative journalism. The news stories, we have them daily, but this kind of long, in-depth features, this is the future. But we have the issues of commercial interest and proprietor affiliations, which are shrinking this industry. And this is what we must speak about. I mean, this is what is making investigative journalism in Kenya. We can count how many reporters are there. We can count how many people tell this kind of stories. And for us, tell this kind of stories more is to have mentorship. You can mentorship to other journalists who can tell the story, and to create a space where Kenyans, our brave Kenyans, can come out there and help us tell this kind of stories. Because at the end of the day, it's not about the likes, not about how famous you are. It is about the impact that reaches the person in Lamu, the person in Wajir, and the person here in Nairobi.
All right, Koki, you get the last word.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we said earlier. Like, how do we pick out these people who then become the driving force? It's not about having multitudes of journalists telling these stories. It is just being able to select a few, either in terms of fellowships, either in terms of mentorships, and looking for funding to, nurture that skill effectively. It's also about reorienting the training. How do we reorient it in such a way that it provides for journalists who can create content that can sell? I keep saying content. We keep saying content. It's key. And if we turn content into a product, then we are better off. And last but not least, I just think that the minute the public can be able to connect the media to changes in society, we are able to become a tool of social advocacy, so that even as we pursue our news stories that are driven by commercial interests, we are also pursuing stories for the sake of stories, so that it makes our life more fulfilling as practitioners, and our role in society as the watchdog more stronger.
That we ought to be.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. That's Kokio Ching, who's a lecturer, media and communication at USIU. Hussein Mohammed, thank you for joining us, reporter and investigative journalist. And last but not least, Anthony Ogonji, who is a communications consultant. And that's the newsroom. For now, we are going to take a short break, but do stay with us. We have more lined up for you. And we'll just look at the Twitter poll question, which we had asked earlier on. And this is in regards to the Bamburi 3-hour ordeal with the terror gang that, took over Bamburi for 3 good hours. Do you think it's possible to eliminate criminal gangs in Kenya? So far, we have 73% of you saying yes, it is possible, and 27% of you saying no, it is not possible. And maybe Hussein, now that you're here, that should be a story that you could follow up on what might be going on in Bamburi and just the issue of terror gangs and why we never seem, and this is not unique to Kenya, by the way. Terror gangs are there world over, but there you go. 73% of you saying yes and 27% of you saying no. I'll sample through your comments as we go along, but for now, we take a short break. We will be right back with Morning Express.